Let's begin by davening that the zchut of our learning should help to bring home the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents, bring a speedy end to all of our conflicts.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so with that, we're going to continue in the Gemara, but we'll just say quickly. So what we learned last week, we were introduced to this concept of hakafat gvil. And we noted, among other things, that Rashi defines this question of hakafat gvil as being a letter that's touching another letter. And that ultimately this is how the Gemara wants to read the Mishnah. When the Mishnah said, "Shtei parshiyot shebemizuzah makvotu etzu b'afilu chtav echad makvan," even one writing holds them back. So in the beginning, the Gemara thinks either it's a letter or it's a part of a letter, but ultimately it says it's a problem of hakafat kvil. So how does that fit into the word ktav? So Rashi explained, Shein kvil mukafa shemudbeket bot acheret v'hainu diktani, and this is what it means when the Mishnah said ktav echad ma'akvan, klomar, that is to say, hilchot mishpat ot achat ma'akva, that the laws that pertain to a single letter hold back the mezuzah or the tefillin. And the particular law then that's highlighted is hakafat gavil. So the other thing that we learned, but we didn't emphasize, but I do want to emphasize now, the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Kol Shein Gvil Mukafla Me Arba Ruchota Psula, from four sides. So this is going to be an important point as we continue. So we're going to continue, and I'm going to, like I did last week, I'm going to call on people to read. So I'm going to start from just the way it's laid out on my screen. So Linda, I'm going to ask you to read here where it says Amar Ashyan Bar Nadbach.
I don't see
Make
that.
that a little bit.
I'm seeing the Al HaTorah screen. Is that?
Oh, I didn't switch it. Thank you. Okay. Do you see my screen now? Okay. All right. Linda, you're up. You're muted.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Amar Ashyan bar Nadbach, Mashmia de Rav Yehuda. Nikav tocho shel he kasher. Irecho pasul.
Okay, let's stop here. So this is one Ma'amar of Ashyan Bar Nadbach. Mishmei. Mishmei de Rav Yehuda. So in Aramaic, the male possessive is Yud He at the end of this, where there's a Seire under the letter before. So it's Mishmei de Rav Yehuda. Instead of, in Hebrew, you'd say Mishmo, and in Aramaic, you say Mishmei. So what did he say? By the way, I also want to point out the first two Ma'amarim we had were Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. And for those of you who may not be familiar, the honorific of Rav that was the title that was given to people who had smicha from Chutz La'aretz. So mainly Bavel, right? So if you got smicha in Bavel, you were given the title of Rav. If you got smicha in Eretz Yisrael, you got the title of Rabbi. So anybody who has the title of Rabbi meant that they got their smicha in Eretz Yisrael, and usually they are in Israel. And occasionally you will see people that sometimes are called Rav so-and-so, and sometimes Rabbi so-and-so. For example, Rabbi Zera appears frequently in the Gemara, is sometimes Rav Zera and sometimes Rabbi Zera, because he originally came from Bavel, and that's where he got his first smicha. And then when he went to Eretz Yisrael, he got, as it were, the upgraded smicha, which there were certain qualitative differences. And then from there on, he was called Rabbi Zera. And then you also have the phenomenon of some people who don't have any title, like
Marzutra.
yeah, okay, well, yes, Marzutra. I was thinking from Tanaim. There's one, Ben Azai, right? Ben Azai is somebody you know. The Gemara said he didn't have a formal smicha. In any event, that's just to bear in mind. But it is important in terms of identification. There's a difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, there were also Rabbi Yehudas who were Amoraim, but mainly when you see Rabbi Yehuda, it's probably going to be the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is not Rabbi Yehuda. It's not the same person. The other thing I want to point out here is the Shalshelet Kabbalah. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda got this from his Rebbe, who was Rav, and it has just now escaped me. Rav was a Talmid of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, meaning he learned with him in Eretz Yisrael, and then he went back to Bavel. And his contemporary, who also learned under Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, was, there's an example, Shmuel. Shmuel is always called just Shmuel, almost always. Sometimes he does have the name Rav attached. He was known as Shmuel. And I don't remember Rav's full name, and that's embarrassing, but I can't remember. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda said this in the name of Rav, and when we'll do some other sources, we'll also see in the Yerushalmi, a lot of the Hilchot STaM actually were said in the name of Rav. Then what we just read now, Amar Ashian bar Nadvach, Gishmei de Rav Yehuda. So this is the next generation. So this is Ashian bar Nadvach. He was a Talmid of this Rav Yehuda. And so he's continuing the line. So what did he say? He said, Nikev tochol shalhei asher. If the toch of the hay was punctured, it's kosher. Yirecho, its leg, pasul. So what do we want to know here? Just to understand this, what do we want to know?
Is the puncture touching the letter?
So, so here, we want to know what exactly does this mean, right? So, mainly we want to know, just in terms of the words, what is the toch of the hay? You notice I didn't translate it. Toch, right, means, we would say in this context, it's probably going to mean in the middle of, in the midst of the hay. If that gets punctured, it's kosher. So without knowing what tocha means, what will be kosher even if it has this puncture?
The form of the letter.
Okay, the Nava, what did you say?
The Sefer Torah.
The Sefer Torah. Well, let's say we'll narrow it. The hay is going to be kosher, right? So the form of the letter hay is going to still be considered to be kosher. Well, I'm not even going to say the form of the letter, because then that will get into this question. But so if the middle, let's say if the middle of the hay is punctured, then it's kosher. If the Yirecho pasul, so this is a truncated sentence, right? It's not a full sentence. What's the beginning of this sentence?
Nikev.
Nikev Yirecho. the yarech of what?
The hay.
Of the hay. Okay, so if the leg of the hay is punctured, it is pasul. And then we're going to see a variation on this in a moment, but let's just take this again. So what is the toe? So what could that mean? So Ron, what did you say?
Well, I assumed it meant the middle of the hay, and then the question is, does the hole touch, is it not touching the letter on any of the sides?
Okay, so so step by step. So the first step that you made was to say, let's say pshuto shel inyan, tocho shel hay is the middle of the hay. And then why do you want to know if that's touching any part of the letter? Why would that be important?
Well, since previously we talked about mukaf gvil, and even though Rashi interpreted it differently, if there's an idea that a letter needs to be surrounded by parchment on all sides, so perhaps if the hole is touching the letter, that would be, you might think that would disqualify.
Okay, so let's take this for a minute. So again, let's be medayek here. So when we had the statement that literally in 4 directions. So what are the 4 directions?
Top, bottom, side, side.
Top, bottom, right, north, south, east, west, top, bottom, side, side, and not necessarily what?
Inside.
Not necessarily inside, right? So maybe this is the diuk that when Rav was saying this din, he's saying that hakafat gvil is only an issue for the part of the parchment that's surrounding the letter, but not necessarily inside the letter. That's one thing to keep in mind. So now also you as Ron noted, so this is we're talking here about a puncture, right? So something came along and like an awl or something came along and punctured the letter, punctured the inside of the letter. How is that different than the way Rashi explained the issue of hakafat kvil? Well, so Ron, you referred to it a moment ago. So what was the difference?
Well, you had mentioned Hakafat Gvil, I believe. I wasn't in the shir last week, but that Rashi explained it to me in letters touching each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we're just talking within the context of the hay and only the hay. So, and the toch of the hay. So Hakafat Gvil shouldn't be applicable if it's a reference to letters touching one another.
Okay, so one difference is when Rashi is talking about a kafat kvil, he's saying that the letter was touching another letter, that is, ink was touching ink, and he doesn't talk about any other instance. So now Ashian Barnadach introduces this idea of Nikev Tochel Shel Hey, that's kasher. So that would fit if so there's a couple of ifs here. So one if is if the nekev touches some part of the inside of the letter, so then that's not the way Rashi explained hakafat kvil. So it doesn't contradict what Rashi said. And maybe hakafat kvil is always only when ink touches ink. But what's the other difference between this case of ink touching ink and nikev? How is nikev distinct from a letter touching another letter?
There's no gvil there now.
Okay, but I'll push you a little bit. Go ahead.
It's taking something away.
Okay, it's taking
Maybe,
something away, but okay. I'll just say it. The other difference is when did the nekev happen?
After the letter's written.
After the letter was written.
Uh,
In other words, what Rashi doesn't say exactly right when hadbaka could have happened, right? The chibur between otiyot, but it could have been toch kedei ktiva. But here, what's the assumption? The assumption is that you had a letter that was written, and then there was a puncture in the middle. So maybe this is also a significant difference. In other words, he doesn't say in katav ot misaviv nekev. Doesn't say that. So what does it mean? We can assume at the time that the letter was written, that the hay was written, the hay was kosher. For whatever purpose it needs to be kosher, it was kosher. And now that there's a puncture in the middle of it, now we have to examine, is it kosher or not? So Ashian Bar Natnach says, Nikev tochel shel hay kasher. So since he doesn't explicitly address Ron's question about whether or not the nekev is touching the ink inside or not, we have to assume that it does, because otherwise, what would be the reason for the psul? Certainly, we don't have any, in the context of what we learned so far, we don't have any reason to believe it might be pasul. But in the context of what we just learned about hakafat kvil, yesh li shum hava amina, I have reason to believe that maybe it would be pasul, because now it's not mukafet kvil inside. So his chidush is, it's not mukafet kvil inside, but that's okay. It's still kosher. Hasher, of course, is lashon b'diavad. It's a b'diavad thing. In other words, in that it was punctured, it's kosher, meaning it's kosher as is. You don't have to fix it. You wouldn't write it like that to begin with, but if it happens, b'diavad, de facto, it's kosher. But yurechol, pasul. If it punctures the leg, then that's pasul. So what's the difference between the toch of the hay and the arech of the hay?
The toch of the hay is not part of the letter that's written in ink. It's part of the space around the ink. But the yerech is the actual ink.
Okay, and so you've taken away from some of the ink, from some of the actual letter itself. And then why is that pasul?
Maybe you don't have the sufficient shiur of a letter remaining.
So maybe this is a problem in Tzurat Od. But what about the other question? What's another reason it might be pasul?
Ketiva Tama, that
Say
it's not complete. Tama.
it,
So
it's not complete. So I think that I would say that's like what Nava's saying. In other words, it's taken away from the wholeness of the letter. But what are we talking about? What's the immediate context? What else could be wrong with it?
It's not mukaf kvil on the outside.
Now I can say maybe it's not mukaf kvil anymore on the outside. In other words, the yarech is different than the toch. So it also doesn't say where the puncture occurs on the leg. But we could say, once it hits the leg, yesh lomar, that it's taking away from hakafat kvil. Maybe that's the problem. Before we look at Rashi, let's continue. So, Rafael, I want you to read. This is Amar
Vera.
Yeah.
ידידים מפרשה לי מיני דרב הונא ורב יעקב אמר.
It goes like this. Adidim afarshali minei de Rav Huna, Rav Yaakov Amar.
Where are you? 1 second. לדידי מפרש לי מיני דרב יהודה, ניקב תוכו של ה' כאשר ירחו, כאשר ירחו.
No. I lay
Yeah.
this out exactly for this reason.
Okay.
Nikev tocho shel hey
כאשר.
kasher.
ירחו, אם נשתייר בו כשיעור עוד קטנה, כאשר, ואם לאו פסול.
Okay, so what's this din, and how is it different than Ashian bar Natbach?
Because what he's saying is that it's
First, say what he's saying. First, basically, I want you to translate, and then tell me what you see different than what was said earlier. First, what does he say?
that Rabbi Yehuda is saying if the inside of the hay is punctured, it's kasher. If the yerecho is punctured, if there's a shiur of a small letter, it's kasher. If it's not, it's pasul.
Okay, so how is this different than what we went from Ashian bar Natbach?
That the puncture itself is not causing per se is not causing it to become pasul. It's whether what's left
To make what pasul? Always be mefaresh.
To make the hay pasul.
Okay.
It's the after if a part of the letter became punctured and so in this case it's the leg. If you don't have enough for the shiur of a small letter, then it's pasul.
Okay. So I'll follow up on what you said a second ago. So what does it tell you about hakafat gvil then? What about the problem of hakafat gvil?
It's not an issue if the letter originally started off as kasher.
So go ahead. If you want to continue, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So if it was originally hakafat mukaf gvil, then if the reason that it's not mukaf gvil is because of a puncture of some sort, then it's still kasher.
Okay.
Unless the part of the letter that's been destroyed doesn't have the shiur that's necessary for a small letter.
Okay. Right. So it does. So we understand now. Maybe this din in the name of Rav Yehuda, either in the name of Rav Huna or in the name of Rav Yehuda, maybe this is to follow up on the din of Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Shein about hakafat gvil. It's telling me that hakafat gvil is only an issue b'shat ktiva, the time that you're writing. But if the letter loses hakafat gvil after the time of writing, then it may still be kosher, even if it's not mukafet kvil. It's going to depend on whether the form of the letter is retained. I may also say that's limited to the case of nikev. In other words, maybe it's not the same. Let's say I've written all the letters and all the letters are kosher, and then some ink drops, a little bit of ink drops and connects two letters. So it was mukafet kvil b'shat ktiva, and now it's not mukafet kvil. So maybe the same din would apply. Since it was kosher at the time of writing, maybe it's still kosher. Or maybe not. We're not sure because at this point we're only discussing hakafat gvil in terms of if it is bleeding, as it were, to the edge of the clef. If it's touching the edge of the clef. Okay. So this is a good start. Let's see how Rashi learned this. So Ron, you're up. Tocho shel hey. So this is Nikep Tocho Shel Hey. Rashi says,
רגל שבפנים.
okay, so what does that mean?
The picture you have, that the hole punctures the leg of the hay, the small inner leg that's detached from the roof of the letter.
Okay. So of course I took the liberty of making this picture. I could have made it in any number of ways, but the reason so first of all, I'm using a hey, more or less the way we write a hey nowadays. And of course, historically, heys were written in different styles and different forms, but we're just going to go with my picture for now. So the reason I put the hole, this gray area, I make it entirely inside. But according to Rashi, Tocho Shel Hey, regel shebifnim, it's the regel that's inside, as opposed to what the Gemara here calls the arech. So if it gets punctured, presumably anywhere. Yikev Tocho Shel Hey, kasher. And Yurecho is what?
רגל הימנית.
Okay, so I made my guess as to what Rashi was talking about here, and this is the way most poskim understand Rashi's comment. But now Rashi says, Lamed Aleph, Lishnach Rina.
לישנה אחרינה, תוכו, הגביל והחלק שבתוכו, ובתפילין כמיירי.
Okay, so what does that mean?
That it isn't puncturing the leg, it's puncturing the empty space in the middle of the letter.
And what's the last thing Rashi says?
That we're talking about tefillin only.
Well, he doesn't
Or
say
tefillin
only.
and mezuzah. Right, tefillin.
Well, he says we're talking about tefillin. How does he know we're talking about tefillin? We'll come back to that. The Gemara doesn't say. In fact, right, because in the context, we should be talking about mezuzah. And of course, we have haze both in mezuzah and in tefillin. But we'll come back to why Rashi says talking about tefillin. So so just in terms of the language of the Gemara, let's say the argument to say that tocho means the space that's inside the hay. I think we all understand that. It's the way Raphael said that. In other words, the toch, we understand, we think of it as the middle of the hay, from the word, that's what toch means. What's the argument to say that tochoshe means dafka, the left leg? Where does Rashi get that from?
Maybe because
Perhaps.
we're talking about a hole in a letter, so he's specifically focusing on the parts of the letter.
Okay. Ron, what did you want to say?
The same point, actually. That you could argue the space is not, you wouldn't call that the hay. It's not the letter itself. It's just the empty space within the letter. So tocho shel
Okay.
hey means it has to be the letter itself.
Okay. And I'll say another way of looking at it is you could ask the question, why did the Gemara choose the letter hey? There are a lot of other letters that have empty space inside of them, right? You also have a bet, you have a dalid, you have a mem, you have a mem stuma, you have a samach. There are a lot of letters that have a toch in that sense of having empty space. But not all of them have something that's inside, that would be considered inside of the letter, that could be as you were both pointing out, that could be part of the letter itself. That could be the ink part. So that seems to be why Rashi leans that way. And later, not tonight, but later on, we'll see later Rishonim who discuss this issue about which pshat they think is more lahalacha, right? Because halachically, these are two different piskei dinim now, right? According to the first pshat of Rashi, Tochoshahe regel shebifnim, what? So let's okay. Before I say it, so let's talk about it. So we didn't discuss this possibility. Tochoshahe is the regel shebifnim. It's this part of the hay. So according to Hashem bar Natvach and according to the other Amoraim, everybody agrees Nikev Tochoshahe is kasher. We all agree that this is kasher. So what's the chidush here? Why would I think it's not kasher?
Part of the letter is missing.
Could say because part of the letter is missing, and in a second later, I'm going to say that if part of the yarech is missing, that it's pasul. So here, it's telling me something that's different about from the left leg, that differentiates the left leg from the right leg. So the left leg, and even later, right, even in the final psak that we have, that's about the right leg. That's kasher. And over here, by Tochel Shalhei, nobody says that it has to be left with the shiur, which implies what? That even if a kol shehu is left, even if a very small bit is left, and I will point out as a halachic digression, this is both. There's a kula aspect to this that if you, let's say you're checking a mezuzah and you find a hay that has just a little, like basically a little dot where the left leg should be. So now you see there is a halachic basis to say it's kosher. There is a halachic basis from here to say that you don't need a shiurot ktana for the left leg. And we'll come back to that and look at later poskim. But this is the source for that. Okay, so here
well, on the flip side of that,
yeah.
if you have a dalet and there's just you are correcting other stuff with a what's it called, not a mechanical pen, like a rapidograph. Thank you, one of those, and it just drops in and there's just the smallest of dot of ink. This became a hay?
It might have. I'd have to see it.
but we're just saying that if it were a hay, we can at least rely on that and say, no, it's still a hay. There's a dot of ink there.
So I was going to start off by saying this is both a kula and a chumrah. So the kula is that if you want it to be a hay, it's a hay, but it's a chumrah because if you don't want it to be a hay, I could argue that it is a hay.
Okay.
I could make the argument that it's a hay, but I'm not here to leave soak.
Okay.
Sikah, no, just simply because honestly, it's going to depend on how it looks. So first of all, it has to be, we have to be reasonable. It has to be a dot that you can see from a regular reading distance. That's the standard for any psak on any tzuratot. It has to look like a certain letter, whatever letter it's supposed to look like. It has to look like that from a normal reading distance. Not with a magnifying glass, not looking up close with your eyes, not holding it up to a light. It has to look like that.
Okay.
So it's going to depend. It'll depend. So there's the possibility that it's so small that nobody would mistake it for a hay. So we'll leave that at that. So now, according to this first pshat of Rashi, the other, the other issue, of course, is the issue that we've been discussing is im nikev tocho shehein. That's the regel shebifnim. So it could be that it can have even a very small shiur left, smaller than an ot ktana, and it will still be kasher. Now it will be in contrast to the later psak of Yirecho, which needs a shiur ktana. According to Ashyan bar Nadvach, nikev Yirecho hayimanit, it's pasul altogether, right? If this is nikev, it's pasul. And so also we can go back and say, what's the issue? It's an issue of hakafat kvil, because here it's not mukafat kvil inside, but we'll say the letter doesn't need to be mukafat kvil inside. But here it's, if it takes away part of the right leg, then that could already be a problem of outside. And that's what I think the diuk in Rashi's lashon tocho shahei. This might be more of a diuk than is reasonable, but regel sheb bifnim. The reason I put the nekev here is the implication is that the nekev is inside also. It's touching the regel on the inside, because according to what I'm saying now about the regel yamani, the regel yamanit, what if this was nikev over here from the outside? Maybe that would be a problem, because then it won't be mukefet kvil mi'arba ruchotah. It won't be mukefet kvil on the left side. Okay.
Why don't we on the way that you have the rechol? Why isn't that problem shel tzurat ot? We don't have.
Why should it be?
Because you don't have one regel lined up against the smaller regel.
Okay. So first of all, we have to point out that according to the Ashyan bar Nadvach, it's pasul. He doesn't say why it's pasul, but he says it's pasul. But you're asking according to the second opinion. Assuming that my surah is also applicable to the second opinion, so then what would it tell you? It would tell you that the right leg and the left leg don't have to come to the same line, right, to be equal on the same line at the bottom. Whole zaman that you have shiurot ktana on the right side, it's still going to be kosher.
Okay.
Haraya. Right? So not l'chatchila, but b'diavad, I see it's going to be kosher. What is shiurot ktana? What does that
A yud.
It's the size of
Why
a
do you
yud.
why do you say size of a yud?
Smallest letter we have.
It's the smallest letter we have. So so you could say that's what he means. Because you might say, I could take any letter and make it small, and I can make it really small. People write, things on the heads of pins, So I mean, what does it mean, shiurot ktana? So you have to give it some kind of k'nei midah, right? It has to have some kind of standard measure. So, and this is the way poskim understand it. Shiurot ktana means the size of the yud. So what does that mean? So for the moment, we're going to go with the idea it would be the size of a yud of the size of the ktav that you're writing, that the hay is written in. Right? Because I could also make a teeny tiny yud in any ktav, right? But let's just say, right? So let's say within the boundaries of what I would consider to be the size of a yud for that size letter. So it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be exactly that size, but let's say within the boundaries of what you would still consider. Bo nagid. Let's continue let's continue now in the Gemara. Just 1 second. Oh, okay. I just seeing the chat, right? So somebody said Shmuel. Noah said to Shmuel, thank you. I guess before I remembered Shmuel, and then Ron said Abba Rich, right? Also, very good. I have this memory that Abba Rich was another name for Rav. I'm not sure. Is that right?
That's why I wrote it, because you
That's what
Yes.
you read
what's
because I
Rav's
said Rav.
name? Yeah.
Oh, that's that. Okay, that was an answer to his name. I had it in my head, and I thought Abba Richta, whatever. Okay, I'm getting old. It's not an excuse, but it'll have to do for now. I just wanted to see thing here. So wait, where are we? Okay. Nava, you read. Agra.
Agra Chamua de Rab Abba, Ifsika le Kara dehe de Ha'am, de Nikva. Ata lakame de Rab Abba, Amar le, Im Mishtayer bo kashiur ot ktana kasher, the Im lav pasul.
Okay. So what is all of this?
You want me to translate?
Yeah.
Uh,
Agra Chamua it is Rebbe, the Rebbe Abba.
so Agra, the father-in-law of Rabbi Abba,
Mm-hmm.
had a break in the leg of the hay from the word ha'am. There was a break made in the leg of the hay of ha'am made by a hole.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought it to Rabbi Abba.
Well, Ata means came. He
He
came before.
He came before Rabbi Abba.
It would be that he brought. Ata came before Rebbe Abba.
He said to him,
Amarle. Mm-hmm.
Amarle, if what's left is the shiur of a small letter, it's kosher. And if not, it's pasul.
Okay. So, okay. Very good translation. So what happened? Yifsikulek kara dehe de ha'am with a nekev. So this is an example, right? This was a maseh shahaya of this issue that we're just talking about a moment ago. And if it happened in the word ha'am, the implication is that this happened in what? Like what was the Kitvei Kodesh that it happened in?
Feeling.
Minastam, it was in Tefillin. Vayomer Moshe Aha Zochor et Yom Hazeh, right? Parshat Kadesh. Maybe this is how Rashi knows that we're talking about Tefillin, because the example that's brought is from Tefillin. The next case is also going to be talking about Tefillin. We have to say more about that Rashi. But Ron, what do you want to say?
Ha'am is also in the Sefer Torah, isn't it?
Ha'am is also in the Sefer Torah. So now what's going to be the difference if the psul is in tefillin as opposed to a Sefer Torah?
Kesidran.
There could be here a problem of Kesidran. And the issue of Kesidran is something we're going to discuss elsewhere, but we could say that this is an underlying assumption that the Gemara has, that we're right, because it's brought in the Gemara in the context of mezuzah and tefillin, right? It's in the Mishnah. It's talking about mezuzot and tefillin, and then the examples are examples like this one, and the next one is going to be from the word vayaharog, right? Which is also right from tefillin, and the issue is why would you have to go to a posek to get this paskin? Why don't you just fix it? So if it's a Sefer Torah, there are ways of fixing it. If it's in tefillin, the implication is that you can't fix it. And the reason I emphasize this is that it seems to be something the Gemara assumes is because we learn the din of Kesidran not directly from the Gemara, but from the earlier source of the Mechilta. We'll get to this eventually, right? There's a Mechilta that we learn the Kesidran from. But there are other places, and this is one of them, where the Gemara seems to assume this din Kesidran. It seems to be an assumption. Okay, so what do we get out of this that we didn't get from before? Or it's the Shaila comes before Rabbi Abba. It's the hay. So what's the kara de hay? You translate it as the leg of the hay. So which is the leg of the hay?
I guess I assumed the right leg.
It's a reasonable assumption. And why would we assume that?
Earlier, everyone agreed that the left leg is kasher, even b'diavad. So perhaps you wouldn't think there's a reason to ask if it's okay or not.
Okay, so first of all, not exactly, because that was the subject of. Wait, maybe I misunderstood what you're saying. Earlier, everybody said that the left leg would be kasher. Is that what you're saying? Oh, okay. Yeah. So you might say so your argument would be if everybody knows that if it's the left leg, then it wouldn't be such a big shaila. But here, we know there's a machloket about the right leg. Right? Some people say im nishtayer bo kshiot katana, it's kasher, and some people say it's STaM pasul. So maybe that's the basis for the shaila. Okay, very good. The other thing we get out of this is it's Maser Rav. In other words, now we had an actual psak in real life. This was not a theoretical case. Until now, the discussion is, as it were, it's a theoretical discussion. But when the shaila came before a posek lahalacha, this is how he actually paskined, and he paskined like the latter opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Huna. So that's an important point for us. Let's see.
Why don't we say that the reason why it has to be the right leg as opposed to the left leg is because the left leg already starts off with the regel being shior keot katana. And so to be left with a shior keot katana is, we just said before, it could be mashu. And that's not shior or katana on the left leg.
I think you could make that argument. You could say, yeah, you could make that argument. It's also possible that there could be some latitude about what the shiur of the Ot Ketana is. That's why when I was explaining it, I could explain it by saying it's something that would be seen as a yud in the context of this tav, but that could also be small. For example, right in the Torah, we have a yud ketana, the name Pinchas.
Okay.
One time it appears with a yud ketana. So, but we still say it's readable in the context of the Torah. So shiur ot ketana might be even a small yud. I wouldn't say it has but it can't be infinitesimal, right? There has to be some order to it. So again, ultimately, like if you're asking me la halacha, it will depend on the context. But your argument is still it's still a good argument. So yeah, so I put that illustration there. That's how I envision it. However, it's also possible if Sikale cried I could make a different illustration. And I could have made the hole in the middle of the leg rather than at the end of the leg. Ifsika, right, it means it was cut off. So it could be, I mean, this is Ifsika, but Ifsika could also be that it was cut off in the middle. But either way, I have to have a Shirot Ktana that's still going to be attached to the Gag. And now we have the next case. So we're back to Linda. Rami Bar Tamri.
Rami Bar Tamri is that Dehu?
Yeah.
Dehu. Chamo de Rami Bar Dikule?
Either way.
Ifsika le Kara de Vav de Vayharog Banikva. So he has a break in the Vav.
Right, in the leg of the Vav.
Of the leg of the Vav.
Yaharog.
Of Yaharog. Atala Kame de Rabbi Zera. So he brought it to Rabbi Zera.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it literally means who
He
came before Rabbi Zera.
He came to Rabbi Zera.
Amar Le.
And he said, yeah, Amar Le.
I'm giving you a hard one here.
Yeah, is this Zeal? Zeal Ite? Zeal Ite. Aite. So you have to take it to a Tinuk. Inuke delo chacham velo tipesh. Inuka delo chacham velo tipesh. I create le v'harog kasher. So if he says it's v'harog, it's kosher. Ilo yeharog who pasul, then it's pasul.
Okay. So, right. So what happened? We had a vav. And what was the problem with this vav?
It sounds as though it was something like the size of a yud. It's broken.
Well, it's broken, right? So this is similar to what? To what we learned before.
To the right leg of the hay.
Okay, but what's going to be the difference between the vav and the leg of the vav and the leg of the hay? What's the halachic difference?
That the letter has different elements to it. So you can still have mukaf veil around the outside of a hay, but a vav is... Sorry, I'm not explaining that very well.
Well, what's going to be the difference between the leg of a hay that gets cut off and the leg of a vav that gets cut off. What's going to be the practical difference?
One is leaving you with something that could look like another letter.
And which one is that?
That's the vav.
That's the vav, right? In other words, I shouldn't make a general. The idea is I can't come here with a general rule that if the leg of a letter gets cut down to, let's say, the size of a yud, that it's automatically going to be kosher, because what about a vav? I could argue that at the very essence of the letter vav, the only difference between the vav and the yud is how long that leg is. So if I reduce the length of the leg, maybe I no longer have a vav. So this Rami Bar Timri, he comes to Rebbe Zera. He shows him this letter, and again, by Harog, the assumption is we're talking here about tefillin. And he says, Zil Aiti Yenuka. So go, Aiti, bring, that's the difference between Ata, he came, Aiti, bring a child, Velo Hakim, Velo Tipesh, right? He's neither wise nor stupid. I karile Bayaharog, Kasher, Ilo, Yehareku, and they're different. Let's see if I put this in here, Girsat Tosfot and Gittin. Yeah, it should be Yehareg. There's the Gir says it's printed in the Gemara, it leaves out the Yud, just as Yaharog. But in the Girs of Tosos, it's Ilo Yeharegu. In other words, I would read it as two Yuds. So what's the pasuk? What's the pasuk that it's quoting? Anybody know the pasuk? Raphael, you should know the pasuk. You should all know the pasuk, but Raphael is a magia, so he has to know.
My brain is not in that mode right now.
Vayaharog Hashem. What? Yeah, okay. So Vayaharog Hashem. So if you read it properly, it's Vayaharog Hashem. God killed. Vayaharog Hashem Kol Bechor Be'eretz Mitzrayim. B'Bechor Adam V'Yad Bechor Behema. If you read it Yehareg, so then it's as if it's almost like a curse of God. Yehareg Hashem, God should be killed. Chas v'shalom. So this is also going to be important when we analyze this a little bit further. But let's just say. So we understand now. So this was the progression now in the Gemara. So the Gemara starts off by introducing the idea that every letter has to be mukefet gvil me arba ruchota. And then I introduce the question of what happens if it loses its hakafat gvil inside. What happens if it loses after shat k'tiva, if it loses hakafat gvil outside? And also, what happens if in either of these cases the form of the letter changes? So we're talking about two things, right? There are two halachic principles. One is this question of hakafat kvil, and the other is tzurat ha'ot. But as we can see, they can be very closely, they can overlap, right? Yeah. Okay. Now this is the source. This Gemara here is the source of this idea of the Shelat Tinok. So, based on what we just read, why does Rebbe Zera say to bring a Tinok? What's the basis for bringing a Tinok? Why doesn't he just paskin?
He wants someone to look at it who's not going to read it in context. He wants someone to just be able to recognize each letter on its own.
Okay. So So from here, right, so this is where we get the basis for the difference, right, between a posek and a tinok in terms of questions of tzurat oath. The problem that the posek has is that he knows too much, right? So he sees the letter, but he knows what letter is supposed to be there. So in other words, what Rabbi Zera is saying is, I know that my mind is going to lean toward what it should be because I know what it's supposed to say. But a child doesn't necessarily know. So if he's chacham, he'll know. How will he know? Chacham can mean a lot of things in this context. But we could say, go ahead.
He will know the context.
He might just be able to read the pasuk and know the context. And so he knows you would never say, Chas v'shalom, yehareg Hashem. Even if he doesn't really know the pasuk, but he knows that's not something you would say. If that's the case, right, which is implied by the way Rabbi Zera says, he says if he reads it, right, if he says vayaharog, then it's kosher. If he says yehareg, it's pasul, right? In other words, he just says if not, if he doesn't read it vayaharog, then it is yehareg, and it's pasul. So it tells you that the child, you need a child who won't understand that if it's yehareg, that would be a psul. It also indicates that when you show this to him, pashtus of the sugya is you show it to him as is. That is, you don't cover up anything. You just show him what you see. So if he knows, so that's the problem. If he knows too much, he could even read from the pasuk before. He can read the pasuk after. He can put it into context in that way. But it doesn't say to show him just that letter. So there's an indication that when you do a shelat tinok, that the most important thing is to find a tinok who knows how to read letters, but is not smart at, right? So he's not tipesh. He's not in tipesh in this context would mean that he's unalphabet, right? He's illiterate. He won't be able to recognize any letter, and I've had this happen to me when I've tested potential tinokot to ask shilas to. I'll show them, right, different examples of letters just to begin with, and they may know some letters, but maybe they don't know all of the letters. Maybe they can't tell the difference between, let's say, a vav and a nun pshuta, or a chaf and a bet. Maybe they get those things mixed up, right? When kids are starting to learn, those are natural mistakes. So you have to get a kid who knows how to recognize letters. They know their letters very well, but they don't know so much that they can read in context. Let's see. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You were emphasizing the fact that if the vav is a yud, it reads yehareg, and that the tinok would, even if he doesn't know how to the full context, he would know yehareg is not appropriate. But isn't the question at hand here is this letter a vav or a yud? And it doesn't matter if the vav, when you translate it into a yud, that then turns it into a blasphemous statement. In any context, if the vav becomes a yud, then you've changed the letter and you don't have the word that you need, and that would be pasul, regardless of if that makes a word that's blasphemous or is gibberish or whatnot.
Yeah, so you're right, but the reason I mentioned the way I do is because of the way Rabbi Zera says it, and that's the diuk that I intimated a few minutes ago. So he says ikarile vayaharog. If the child read it vayaharog, kasher, and if not what?
You didn't read it.
He didn't read what?
Vayaharog.
If he didn't read it Vayaharog, in other words, anything short of reading it Vayaharog, then Yehareghu, and it's pasul. So the reason I say, so that's the psak of Rabbi Zera. He's saying it's Yehareg. So why do I point out that there's a blasphemous aspect to it? Because it's just to emphasize that it has to be a Yenuka de lo Chakim velo Tipesh. Because if he's Chacham, he'll think that it's Yehareg, or he'll think that maybe it's Yehareg, and then he'll change his mind because he'll know that it can't be Yehareg. If he's Tipesh, he won't be able to read it at all. So it has to be. So it's not that the child says Yehareg; it's that that's what it will be. It'll be Yehareg. But if he's too smart, he might think it looks like Yehareg, and then he'll say no, but obviously it can't be, and he'll read it Vayaharog. That's the implication. Let's look at Rashi here. And we're not going to get to the Yerushalmi today, but let's read Rashi, and then we're going to probably have to pick up from this Rashi again next week. So Ron, why don't you read Vav de Vayaharog?
Vav de Vayaharog. Kol bechor ira bimkom nekev
So
v'nir'eh
Rashi,
keminyod.
yeah. I'm sorry, so right, so Kol Bechor is just the Hemshech of Vayaharog. Vav de Vayaharog Kol Bechor.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, so now continue. Ira b'makom nekev v'nir'eh keminyod. So what does that mean?
So the Vav of Vayaharog and Vayaharog Kol Bechor, in that place there is a hole that has come to be, and it appears to look like a Yud instead of a Vav.
Well, what's the Ira? In those Ira bimkom nekev. What happened?
I read it, Iraba Makom Nekev, that a hole appeared in that place.
So I could read it either way. Yirab b'makom, but I think right. Yirab b'makom nekev. Rashi is being medayek here because in the earlier, when we started talking about this, we said nikev tocho shahay, right? Nikev. In the last case, ifsika like cry dehe, b'nikva. We assumed that it was also the same thing, that the nekev came later. But Rashi could be saying now, Yusika le cry the vav yarog b'nikva. I can read that straight, that right, that the leg of the vav was interrupted by a hole.
At the time it was written.
At the time it was written. So now this is introducing, if that's right, if that's what Rashi means, now it's introducing a different concept that to begin with, maybe this vav wasn't kosher. Keep reading. Delo chakim.
Delo chakim, תהי חכים מבין שמחרף הוא לומר יהרג כלפי מעלה, ואומר ויהרוג. So if he were of a sufficient level of intelligence, he would understand that this would be blasphemous to suggest that God will be killed. And so he will correct himself and read it as Vayaharog.
Very good. And lo tipesh?
Shim tipesh sheno yodea likrot ela ot shlema. If he is tipesh, though he doesn't know how to read except the full letter. That's all he knows how to do.
Okay, so Rashi's definition of tipesh is not somebody who's completely illiterate, but what? What's the tipesh?
You can't read a word, just a letter.
Well, and even, you know what? We may not care that he can read a word, but what do we care about?
He has to read a whole letter. He can only, that's all he can read.
That's all he can read. So if you show him a partial letter, you know, we have lots of examples of this, you know, even in type. If I could try to make a little surah here. You know, so like if I make, like in Hebrew, let's say I go like this and I go like that. So what letter is that?
That.
Or resh.
But it has the thing down here.
A
So
bet.
what would I? It's a bet. And I can make a typeface with letters that are not connected, and we'll all know what the letters are. And there are such typefaces, right? And then the same thing in, you know, the same thing in English, in Latin letters, right? I could make an A like this. I know that that's an A, right? So Rashi's saying that Tipesh is somebody who wouldn't necessarily know that I have to connect these. When we look at these letters, we make the connection in our head. But the Tipesh may not. And Rashi here uses the term ot shlema, which is going back to the way Rashi explained in the Mishnah in the beginning of the Gemara, this idea of ktivat tama it's ot tama ushlema, right? So it has to be l'chadchil. You have to write a ktivat tama. So I know that if there's a nekev in the vav, I know that it's no longer necessarily going to be ktivat tama. That's going to be part of our wider discussion. But the Tipesh only sees an ot shlema. Less than an ot shlema, they may not know. And in fact, they might look at this first surah that I did, and they might say, that's a resh, and they may disregard the fact that there's a base underneath. So I can't depend
What
on
you'll
the,
see here are
Tipesh
three statements.
to make such a, and one of them is going to be, some of them are going to be very,
So
right,
I think we're
similar
going to
to what
stop
we
here,
had. And then we didn't get to
but we're going to
Yerushalmi. But if you look at the Yerushalmi, or you look at the Yerushalmi, this is the same person that we saw, where it says Nikev Nekev Be'emtza Bet. He picks a bet. And there he says explicitly, Ima Yahagvil Makifo Mikol Tzad Kasher Bimlav Pasul. And so here in the Yerushalmi, Bimfurash, it introduces the idea of Hakafat Gvil in the middle of the letter. So that's what we're going to try to examine next time. But we're going to pick up, I want to examine a little bit more from the last part that we did, but this is the thing that we want to examine now. I want to compare the Yerushalmi to the Bavli on all of these issues. So are there any last questions, comments?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
if
Raphael, go ahead.
you had a shin, not a hey or a kuf or a bet. You had a shin, and the nekev was in the rosh of the shin. So that, let's say one of the roshim just has a regular. They all have yesh reglaim lekulam, and one of them is missing the rosh, and there's the nekev there. Is that a question a question for Shalat Tinok, or it already doesn't have Tzurat Ot?
That's a good question. So we've so far from the, I'm just going to say based on what we learned in the Gemara, based on what we learned in the Gemara, we're going to understand when am I going to ask a question of a Tinok? Based on this case that we have. So you tell me, when do I ask the question to the Tinok?
I was under the impression that if it
No, I'm not asking you what you're in the impression of. I want to know from the Gemara that we learned, what did you learn?
That you would ask a Tinok and say, what letter do you see?
Yeah, but when? Why do I ask the Tinok here in Vayaharog and I didn't ask him about the
Oh, actually,
the
I
hay?
I do know that because the question for a Tinok is only with a letter where it could be one letter or another letter.
Where do you see that?
Because
No,
it could
because
either be a Vav or a Yud.
okay, so it's a possible diuk from our Gemara. It could be that the din of the Shelat Tinok is only a din when I have a letter that could be another letter, because that's the example that's brought.
Right. Okay.
That's the example that's brought. So based on that,
Okay.
then Lech Teda. But I'm not going to answer your question, La Halacha, because there may be other implications there. Linda, you wanted to say something.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, were you saying this is the source for the Shelas Tinuk, this particular Gemara?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the first time we see
this
it.
is where it all starts.
Wow. Thank you.
This is where it all starts. And yeah, and that's why Raphael's question is a good question, because here based on what I see, I might limit it to such a case. I might say that Shelat Tinok is only pertinent when I look at the letter, and I, as a literate adult, I am not sure if it's this letter or if it's that letter. But what about a case where it's either this letter or no letter at all? Or what about a case where it's this letter and it might still be this letter, but I'm not sure now if it still has tzurat, like the proper tzuratot. So last week we introduced the idea when we were talking about the yud that a yud might be missing something so essential that maybe it's no longer a yud. And the reason I told you we're going to look at other poskim, that we can Tosfos and look at the Rosh. I'm waiting to look at the Tosfos and the Rosh until we do more in the sugya, because we're going to refer back to it. So that was one that we understood from the beginning of the sugya, that there's a certain concept of the minimum tzurat ot. Every letter must have at least a minimum tzurat ot. And now I'm running into this question: what if I have an ot and I'm not sure if it's another? And I've also introduced the problem of what happens if the letter was written properly and then later on it was somehow diminished? Does that make a difference? Is there a difference between then Shat Ktiva and Lachar Shat Ktiva? So these are all questions that have now been touched upon here. And in the case of the Shelat Tinok, if I'm going to be very strict about what I say, I'll say that the case when you bring a Shelat Tinok is when I have in front of me a letter and I'm not sure if it's this letter or another letter. I could say that's the only case that I ask a Tinok. Tov, Bezrat Hashem, next week I will be broadcasting, as it were, from the States. And unless you hear from me otherwise, I'll be broadcasting from there. And like I said, I am going to issue another link. Anybody who, if the issue is, I ask everybody for payment. I also want to emphasize that if you can't afford the payment that I asked, please contact me and I will work out something with you. There are a couple of reasons I ask for payment. One is,
You're Jewish.
Min hadin, you're not supposed to take money for teaching Torah. The heter for taking money for teaching Torah is that it's taking me away from making money doing other things. And so I'm basically asking you to pay me for my bitul zman, as it were. But the other reason is, and this is something that I've learned from personal experience, people who pay money, even a symbolic amount of money, to a class, tend to devote more of their own energies to that class than if it's free. Maaseh Shahaya, that back, like when I was here in Yeshiva in the 70s, the Rabbanut of Yerushalayim used to give a course in Sofrut, in STaM. You know, if you graduate, they would give you Kabbalat Sofrim. And somebody who did that course told me, I don't know if they told him this before or after, anyone who completed the course would get a refund on all of their money. But there was such a high attrition rate that most people, you know, paid and then they didn't get their money. But that they only made them pay because they wanted them to dedicate themselves to coming to the shiur. So that is one of the reasons I charge. I think it makes it more dear to the people who participate. That's why you'll see it. I'm completely flexible on how much is paid. I base what I ask on certain considerations of my own, but I'm completely flexible. So with that, I bid you all good night.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you.